Welcome back. Welcome back to another edition of Electric Avenue's YouTube channel. Welcome to the catacombs. I'm here in my home, giving you a special treat, my rundown of my top 20 albums of 2022. I did this last year from a similar location. It was against that wall instead. This year I decided to come back here because I feel like this is more personal and intimate, and I wanted to distance myself from the store a little bit and give you my favorites. And it would be very easy to do a list of like top 20 best albums of the year, but I'm kind of like more focused on me here. And I was kind of thinking like, well, if I give my favorites, then maybe somebody will be interested enough to want to check one of these out too. So that's sort of what I was thinking here. But anyway, I'm not going to take a whole lot of time. I already tried doing this once and it went on for over half an hour, and then I forgot a name, and I'm like, nope, people don't want to listen to me for that long anyway. So gonna zip through these as quickly as I can with and make my points. So there are some things that just barely missed my list. I'm sorry, Afghan Wigs. I really, really love that album, and Beyonce. Maybe next time. I think those are both great, great albums, and it was hard choosing what I wanted to keep on the list this time. But anyway, number 20, Belle Sebastian, a bit of previous. So this is sort of a kind of a traditional sort of Belle and Sebastian album, but I feel like it's more upbeat, more pulled together, even production wise. Stewart's vocals have gotten stronger over the years. When they started, they were sort of his voice was sort of wispy and a little out of tune, and that was very endearing. But now they're just such a professional type group. And Young and Stupid is such a great opening song. Do It for Your Country is a great song. I know If They're Shooting at You was sort of a controversial song, but especially when we started having the Ukraine issue. But anyway, I thought this was a very good album, a great entry from them. A bit of a return after sort of what I thought were the mildly lackluster three EPs they put out a few years ago. Number 19, Hot Chip, Freak Out Release. This to me was my favorite Hot Chip album since In Our Heads. And the other ones were good, but this was really a great record. The vinyl has an extra track on it. Eleanor was a great single. Down was kind of fun. Hard to Be Funky is kind of great. There was a lot of sort of referencing of life in the pandemic and sort of how to move on after that. And I think that that's sort of reflected in a lot of these albums and sort of albums that have come out really in the last couple of years, but particularly this year, because I think a lot of these albums were made in the midst of the pandemic, and it's sort of like you were kind of living with it at that time. So, yeah, I think not only albums, but artwork and things like that are sort of reflected in that. Like I think of Sharon Van Etten, who also just barely missed my list, but the scene of her house trying to be there with her house while forest fires are raging or wildfires in the hills of California behind her. Anyway, this is another sort of epic picture. Number 18, the Yeah Yeah Yeahs, Cool It Down. Um, I love this record. I wish it was a little bit longer. There are 8 tracks. If they've been gone for what was it, 9 years and hadn't made an album, I would have hoped for a little more. But the songs on here are amazing. Whether it's Spitting Off the Edge of the World with Perfume Genius, or Burning is a great song. I would say Fleas is amazing. That kind of references a sort of a New York club culture, and especially Wolf. What an epic, epic pop song that is. And I hope that this is part one of two. I just want them to do a little bit more. And hoping that Nick Zenner gets over his pneumonia soon so they can go back out and tour and whatever. They were supposed to be on Saturday Night Live next week, and now Lizzo's stepping in because he's still too sick. So that's unfortunate. It's a great album. All right, 17. Uh, Dragon New Warm Mountain, I Believe in You by Big Thief. This came out very early in the year, and it was a super sort of Americana deep dive. And I have new respect for Adrienne Lenker as a writer. I think she does amazing lyrics on this album, and also her vocal delivery. It's somewhat like raw and unrehearsed, but then it's got this directness to it that just is so um, honest and true in the delivery. And it's 20 songs. It's a long album. It's like a double album. It doesn't feel that long. And I know it's not really for everybody, probably, but I like the fact that it goes from Americana into sort of like almost like post punk kind of stuff, or trip hop or something like that. So a wide range of influences and styles. And she and Buck and the band, I think they did a great job. And that album has been very popular. So, number 16, Beth Orton. This is Weather Alive. Um, Beth has, been singing now 25 years. She's been recording and singing almost. Maybe more than that, because I guess she did start with William Orbit. But this album is very different, I think, in a way, and it feels to me like she's finally finding her true voice, and it's not, weirdly, I don't think it's to everyone's liking. Um, she had some sort of like an illness that she's been dealing with. I know she had Crohn's, and then there was some other thing that's crept in there. She was having seizures and stuff, and it affected her voice, and so she sounds very ragged and rough, and was kind of afraid of singing and putting out an album. And so it's really intentional that she's kind of singing the way that she is, but the music is sort of this kind of muted jazz folk stuff. Tom Skinner from The Smile, who is now playing with those guys from Radiohead, plays drums on this and percussion. And I think that kind of mixed with the talk influences from the mid 80s give this album a very like great sort of quiet early morning driving sort of feel to it. The rhythms are very hypnotic, and I don't know, it's just a kind of a classy album that doesn't try too hard, to get points across or whatever. Yeah, check it out. Number 15, Beach House, Once Twice Melody. I love Beach House, Baltimore. Um, I think that this is probably my favorite album of theirs since Bloom. That includes Depression Cherry, because I like that album, but I don't love it. I feel like it's kind of samey all the way through this album. Again, 18 tracks, so there's more tracks to choose from, but it definitely has more ebbs and flows in it. And I think it's just probably their most accomplished recording so far. They just keep getting more interesting. So I do like that record. Number 14, Destroyer, Labyrinthitis, Dan Bayar from Vancouver. Still making always very interesting records. And I like this album a lot because it's concise, and it puts together all of the different parts of Destroyer's personality, whether it be like Kaput's sort of smoothness or some of the more ragged stuff, like things from other albums where there's a little more guitar. Eat the Wine, Drink the Bread is a great groovy song. So June is kind of too, but it like does a lot of playing with pitch shifting of his vocals. And I don't know, the songs are not necessarily like the most meaningful songs, but it's all about the play with language and how words sound. And he'll just basically like say words that sound interesting. And I kind of like the free expression of that. That's a interesting concept. Number 13, Dubstars 2. Well, some people might be like, who's Dubstar? Well, if you sort of know British rock of the 90s or pop, Dubstar was a trio in the 90s and they broke up at the turn of the millennium. And then Sarah left and was in a band called Client for a while, very electro clash kind of stuff. And then eventually Dubstar started talking about getting back together, and one of the guys decided not to come back, so it was just her and Sarah and Chris. And they did make an album a few years ago, with Youth from Killing Joke produced it. It's a little more organic sounding. This sounds more like classic Dubstar, though. It's if you like Pet Shop Boys, Saint Etienne, stuff like that. Very sort of like kind of light breezy electro pop sort of stuff. Co-produced or produced by Stephen Hague. He was one of their original producers, and you might know If You Leave by OMD or True Faith by New Order. He worked on those tracks. So this is a fantastic album. I love Token, the first song. That and I Can See You Outside are just great, which is obviously kind of got a little bit of a pandemic thing. Hygiene Strip, probably my favorite pandemic related song ever that I've heard. Blood is a great song about Chris being in the hospital, having like basically a brain hemorrhage. And Perfect Circle, the last song on here, is a cover of an REM song done as a piano ballad from one of their early records. I think it was on Murmur, maybe. I don't know. It's a interesting cover of it, so check that out. Number 12, another duo, Tears for Fears, The Tipping Point. Well, what can be said? I mean, it had been a decade and a half, almost 2 decades since the last effort, and they just couldn't seem to get on the same page for a long time. And I think it took Roland's wife passing away, which sort of influenced a lot of the lyrics on this album, and he and Kurt sort of got back together and did something really special. It's really a great, great album. It's up there with their Imperial Phase albums, the first three or four, or I should say three, before Kurt left. The title track was great. No Small Thing was really great. I love Break the Man. Is just, it's almost like you hear it and it's like an old friend. Reminds me of like Everybody Wants to Rule the World type songs. So anyway, it's kind of a shock seeing Roland's picture there the first time, because I'm like, oh my gosh, he's so old. But really, I think he just let his hair go white. So anyway, but check that out. Another very strong album, and haunting for people who may have lost loved ones or have people in their lives that are very ill. Number 11, The Weeknd, Dawn FM. This came out very early in the year, and it was, I think, sort of meant to be a follow-up to After Hours. And while that album was just a massive, massive hit, this was a pretty big hit, but it wasn't like on that scale. And that's a shame, because as an album, I think this has better structure. It's kind of fun with all the Jim Carrey radio announcer and purgatory stuff in between, and he can be funny or he can be kind of like almost like sad and heartbreaking in a way, but I think he added something to the album. Take My Breath is a super like Michael Jackson kind of sounding single on here, but I think Less Than Zero is probably my favorite song, which is a very kind of 80s type song. I don't know why it wasn't bigger, because that, I mean, I don't know if they've officially released that as a single. But anyway, this is a great album. I also feel like it's a little more pulled together than some of his other albums, because some of them go on and on and on and have kind of like slower parts in the middle, and this one sort of avoids those things. The structure is better. All right, top 10. I'm trying not to take too long. Number 10, Wet Leg. You knew it had to happen. Wet Leg. What can be said except, girl rock, very 90s referencing, humorous. If you like the Pixies, Veruca Salt. I mean, I don't know. It's just a very funny and charming and witty, and it's not groundbreaking necessarily, but I love it, and so do a lot of other people. It's just a lot of fun, and I think we all wanted to kind of hear some fun music after like all of the crap. All right, not necessarily with the crap being quite over yet, but still, an extremely successful album. Supposedly, they've already recorded the follow up because they had time. Number 9, Spoon, Lucifer on the Sofa. Again, one of my favorite albums of the year. I don't think there's a wasted second on this album. It's all very well pulled together. It's probably my favorite, tied with They Want My Soul from them. Although their last album was quite good too, but I think they've really, like, they're having a really great streak of just fantastic albums. A lot of these are catchy songs, like On the Radio is catchy. The Hardest Cut, Wild is like my favorite song on here. My Babe is even, great song. I think The Devil and Mr. Jones is kind of fun. Um, Sort of like a great lost 70s FM rock album in a way. So you might want to give that a listen. Number 8, Wyeth's Blood. This is the album. And In the Darkness, Hearts Aglow. Natalie Mering is sort of a mystical sort of creature, in my opinion. Her last album, Titanic Rising, was maybe in my top 1, 2, or 3 the year it came out. It might have even been number 1, where it was close. And then this is done very, very well as well. Produced by Jonathan Rado of Foxygen, and it's like a 70s, again, sort of FM type album, but with a lot of like mellower textures, orchestras, harps, interesting chord progressions, and her voice, which sits somewhere between like Amy Mann and maybe Karen Carpenter. I don't know. There's a sort of soothing alto quality to it, but she just has so much control over her voice, and I think it proves that you can make an album in 2022 without a whole bunch of technological bells and whistles that have to like catch people's attention, and it's just such a beautiful, haunting piece of work. Mature, very, very good. I can't wait to hear what other stuff she comes up with throughout her career. Number 7, the exact opposite. Viagra Boys. No, I do want to hear more from these guys. This album is called Cave World, and it's really these Swedish guys sort of referencing like the destruction of the world here, whether it's social media or whatever we're being bombarded with. But I enjoyed this album a lot. It's sort of post-punky and fun and very visceral and very political. If you're extremely right-wing, you might not want to listen to this because it might set you off. But the first track, Baby Criminal, sounds like an angry Nick Cave song about a guy who like has violent tendencies, a teenager or a child, I think teenager, and people don't know what to do about it, and he's like, taking guns out into the world. I mean, it's just, it's sort of like reflecting what's going on in life. Troglodyte is a great song. Reminds me of Girl You Want by Devo. Punk Rock Loser, Creepy Crawlers, Ain't No Thief. It's a very groovy album, but it's kind of heavy, and I like the punky aspects of it, so highly rated. Number 6, Always, Blue Rev. This album went through so much turmoil trying to get made, whether it be having their original demo tapes stolen, having their equipment damaged in a flood. You sort of name it, they had problems. Things about getting across the border. The band was sort of between Canada and the US, and borders got locked down, and then COVID happened. So yeah, it took years, but Super catchy pop rock album. Again, not reinventing the wheel, but they have such an interesting way of like changing to different keys, or like having a pause where things get quiet and then they just build again. The songs are always like infused with surprise elements, and her voice is fantastic. Some of the songs have references to pop culture, whether it's Tom Verlaine or Belinda Carlisle. I really like the songs Pressed, After the Earthquake, Easy on Your Own. Those are all great. Velveteen is great. Uh, Highly rated. Highly. Getting a very high marks on places like Rate Your Music, too. All right, top five. Is it really 2022? Is this really the London Suede? Let's just call him Suede. Suede. I am so excited that this album is as good as it is. It came out when it did. Their last three albums have all been great. Um, this is this is the fourth since they got back together. They made five originally, even with changing a guitarist after the first couple. But there was a long period where it didn't seem like Suede would ever make another album, and yeah, this is great. It's a more aggressive rock album, and it sounds like they're actually getting younger rather than aging. She Still Leads Me On, the first song, is an incredible homage to Brett Anderson's mother, who passed away. And it's just very heartfelt. Then there's songs like Drive Myself Home, which are just very haunting ballad, kind of like dark. Turn Off Your Brain and Yell is another one. But most of the album is pretty rockin', like 15 again. I mean, it's sort of glammy. They always have been sort of glam rock, but it's also like super catchy, very British. I feel like they're the lost link between the Smiths and like Blur and Oasis, because they were kind of in between there. And every bit is good. Every bit is deserving of the praise. Richard Oakes really comes into his own as lead guitarist on this album. I think for a long time he was sort of playing like not like he was in the background, but sort of like deferring to a little bit of what other people wanted to do, and it's just such a good album. All right, top four. Number four, Elvis Costello and the Imposters, The Boy Named If. The Boy Named If is the boy named imaginary friend. And this is, if you put this on and you didn't know what you were listening to, you would think that this was an album that was recorded in 1981. It sounds like Elvis Costello has like turned back the clock. I mean, I played this for someone and they were like, was this an unreleased album? No. Um, yeah, now there's some things here that are sort of a little bit like more, maybe they would have come later. Like Trick Out the Truth sounds like kind of a Carnival-esque type. It reminds me of like Tom Waits or the song God's Comic from Spike. But like Mr. Crescent and Paint the Red Rose Blue are just amazing ballads. And then most of the album is kind of rocking. My Most Beautiful Mistake, Farewell Okay. I put this on and it just makes me so happy that Elvis is, what, 70 almost? And surviving cancer and making records that are still like so visceral, and I don't know. I'm getting choked up. He's really like the greatest writer of a generation, up there with like Bob Dylan and Tom Waits, and I don't know, there's a few others, but Neil Young, I suppose. But it's just great. All right, top three. Daniel Rossum, You Belong There. Guy from Grizzly Bear, the band Grizzly Bear. This record absolutely stunning. I don't know. I mean, I know that he's been in Grizzly Bear all this time. I don't know what he's been doing as far as like taking the reins on stuff because it feels like he was sort of maybe, I don't want to say deferring to others again because that's not quite the case. But this is Daniel completely coming into his own. He plays almost every instrument on this album except the drums. I think he maybe does. He learned how to play all sorts of wind instruments like clarinets and horns and whatever, violins. He really did almost everything on here. And it's one of those records I listen to and I think, how in the world does he keep all of this together? And then I've watched some of his live clips on online, and it's also stunning. It's like how, I mean, the guy is super talented, and that album is a very intimate sort of jazz rock folk album, but the arrangements for guitar and I mean, there's a lot of fast playing. It has almost like kind of a Spanish feeling to it, like Spanish guitar. Definitely check it out. It's not for everybody, but it's so impressive. Number two, The Smile, a light for attracting attention. Well, this is Tom York and Johnny Greenwood and Radiohead side project with Tom Skinner. I love The Smile. I think it's one of the best Radiohead. If you include it in Radiohead's discography, it's up there as one of the best. So definitely listen to this. There are so many good songs. Um, I mean, I don't even know what to say. When people tell me they're like, "Oh, it's good, but I don't like it as much as Radiohead," I think I don't know what album you're listening to because it's every bit as good as Radiohead. And some people have told me they like it better than the last couple. So anyway, my number one album of the year. I know I'm unique in choosing this, but I said this is my personal list. This album hit me like no other earlier this year. I was sort of in a very kind of alone state and ready to absorb this, and I didn't know it was even coming. And I sort of stumbled upon it, and then I was super impressed. And then the more I heard it, the more impressed I got. And this guy's been around for a really long time, like 20 years, but it's so good. Sandra Lerche, Avatars of Love. Now, his last album was also really great. This is a much more epic double album situation. A lot of tracks. But this was something he wrote and recorded during the pandemic. And really, he sort of really has come into his own over the last 4 or 5 albums. I think before that, he was sort of making good sort of alternative pop records. And these last couple in particular are just so haunting because he'd made a trilogy which were about his divorce and finding new love. And then that relationship fell apart. And this is sort of like the album that was sort of like he started writing and he just couldn't stop. And it was all about like how relationships seem to elude him in a way. And there are a couple 10-minute songs on here. The title track being one, which is sort of a epic kind of like almost like a widescreen kind of film type presentation. And he goes into this whole description in the middle of the song of all of these songs that he's listened to during the pandemic that have affected him emotionally. And he mentions like Joni Mitchell and Taylor Swift and Britney Spears and all sorts of like different like musicians and writers and artists and that you're like, that's all the stuff that he's been influenced by, and it's cool that he can throw that into a 10-minute song and make it work. There's a lot of catchy sort of pop songs on here, and then there's this beautiful orchestral epics, and the arrangements are so great. A lot of features on this one too. Aurora, Mary Lattimore, Felicia Douglas from Dirty Projectors, Chai. So anyway, and also Sondre Norwegian, but grew up with a tradition of Brazilian guitarist teachers. So there's definitely an influence of sambas and bossa novas and all that. And I think that that kind of really speaks to him as an artist, these last couple albums. And he's just an extraordinary singer songwriter that doesn't really probably get enough attention now because he's on his own label and not a major label the way he was. I don't really think, well, I don't know, in grooves. Anyway, Sandra Lerche, Avatars of Love. Go listen to it. I mean, and again, I don't think it's an album that's necessarily going to hit everybody the first time. It takes probably a few plays for some people. And if you don't really, if that doesn't really like hit you right away, go back and listen to the previous two or three, because there was Pain, Pleasure, and Please, the 3P albums of the trilogy that sort of chronicle the journey from divorce through new love through breakups again, which is sort of like very common sort of thing. When I was talking about how, you know, people like well, I'm thinking about people like Beyonce or like Madonna who make albums that are very self-referential and very specific. And he's done that too, but he's made it really relatable for a lot of people because of the kind of pain of relationships that everyone goes through. So, all right. Well, there you have it, my top 20. Thank you for watching. And, I hope that you found it not too boring and there's something on there that maybe you want to check out. So, all right, take care. Thanks, and have a great holiday season. And I'll see you later this week with more new releases. Peace.